What's up, gamers? This is JB Huskers with the EA Sports Game Changers, and I'm going to bring you something new this year with a Madden NFL 11 fantasy focus. What we're going to do is we're going to tie in the real-life fantasy football season in with Madden NFL 11. We're going to give you some news, some tips, and some hints throughout the season to help you out with your fantasy football league this year. And this first video is going to be the top 10 performers of the 2009 NFL football season. Quite possibly the most dangerous man in Madden NFL 11 was also the top overall performer in the 2009 fantasy football season. That is none other than the Titans' Chris Johnson. Now, not only are you going to dominate Madden NFL 11 with this cat, but you're also going to dominate your fantasy football league if you take this guy. As you can see, with the awesome abilities of Chris Johnson, he totaled 329 fantasy points, most in the nation last year. That's because he broke the 2,000-yard rushing mark, along with having 50 receptions for 500 yards. He ended up totaling 16 touchdowns, and this is why Chris Johnson was the top performer in 2009 and is also going to look to be the top performer in 2010. 2009 was definitely a great year for our number 2 fantasy performer in the NFL for fantasy football. That is Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers, stepping out of Brett Favre's shadow to just definitely torch defenses within the NFL with his great passing ability, his great weapons such as Donald Driver and Greg Jennings. As you can see, he had 327 fantasy points, only 2 less than Chris Johnson. That was because he was able to have a great passing touchdown to interception ratio of 30-7. This is why Aaron Rodgers was the number 2 fantasy football player of 2009. Coming in at number 3 for 2009 in the fantasy football tally is none other than Madden NFL 11 cover man Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints. Drew Brees, ever since he has become a Saint, has just torched all the defenses that he has come across, and he's been able to do it with a 7th round pick out of Hofstra by the name of Marcus Colston. As you can see, he had 280 fantasy points last year. This was due to a great passing season of 4,388 yards and also 34 touchdowns. Now, Drew Brees is always year in and year out a safe bet to come in and definitely get you some points in the fantasy football season. Probably the most surprising fantasy football player of the 2009 season was none other than number 4 himself, Brett Favre. His first season in Minnesota after a long and illustrious career in Green Bay and then a season with the Jets, comes into Minnesota and just completely tears up the fantasy football world. 274 points. That was mainly because he was actually for once able to keep his interceptions down. Nice touchdown to interception ratio of 33-7. Now, if he decides to come back to the Vikings this year, you definitely know you want to draft him sometime a lot earlier than he was drafted last year. Our number 5 fantasy performer year in and year out is at the top 10 in fantasy scoring. That is none other than Colts future Hall of Famer quarterback Peyton Manning. He comes in at number 5 in total points for the 2009 season, and mainly just kind of doing business as usual, tattling 272 fantasy points by getting 4,500 total passing yards, 33 touchdowns. Now, his interceptions were kind of high this year. That probably has led for him to only get number 5 this year in the fantasy football scoring. Almost out of nowhere in the fantasy world, our number 6 fantasy football player hails from the Houston Texans, none other than Matt Schaub. When the Texans dealt to get Schaub, they probably figured that he would be the guy to try to get them to the playoffs for the very first time, and he has definitely got them very close to the playoffs. Many are predicting them to get to the playoffs this year. Of course, it helps when you have the best wide receiver in the game with Andre Johnson. But as you see, he totaled 4,770 passing yards, which was the league best. Now, the interceptions are kind of high, which keeps him from the very top echelon, but he's got another year under his belt, so there could be a very good chance that he could be a top 5 or even top 3 overall player this year. This guy may not get it done in the playoffs, but he definitely gets it done on the fantasy football world. Number 7 in our top performers of 2009 is the Hollywood quarterback himself, Tony Romo of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, he was able to do it by keeping his interceptions down. He only had 9 for the season, 26 passing touchdowns, almost 4,500 passing yards, very close to Peyton Manning-like numbers. That is why he is the number 7 player of 2009. The second best running back in 2009 for fantasy football was the number 8 overall player, and that's number 28, AP Adrian Peterson, all day. As you can see, the second Viking to be on this top 10 list with Brett Favre. He was able to do it by getting 43 receptions for 436 receiving yards on top of his expected running back production. He had 18 total TDs, but his fumbles may have kept him from getting closer to Chris Johnson-like numbers in 2009. If he's able to figure out the fumbles, he can definitely get himself back into that top 5 or top 3 status as an overall player. Now, if Brett Favre comes back, that's definitely going to open up the game for Adrian Peterson, but if it ends up being Tavares Jackson, that could be a problem. I don't know if it's possible to give a Comeback Player of the Year award to someone who's won an MVP, but I tell you what, in fantasy football, that Comeback Player of the Year was none other than Tom Brady. Comes in at number 9 overall. Now, in week 1 of the 2008 season, his entire season was cut down by a knee injury. He comes back in 2009 with handy weapons like Randy Moss and Wes Welker, some young guns like Edelman. He was able to get 29 total touchdowns, and that was enough to get him into the top 10 this year in fantasy points for 2009. One guy that'll probably not make the top 10 list in 2010 was a guy, though, that did make that list for 2009, Big Ben Roethlisberger of the Pittsburgh Steelers, coming in at number 10 overall for 2009. He had done it with some good passing and some good help from Santonio Holmes. Hines Ward was able to throw for 4,300 yards, 28 total touchdowns, but being suspended for the first 4 to 6 games of the 2010 season, it's very likely that Big Ben Roethlisberger will not crack the top 10 in fantasy points this year, but he may be someone you may want to look to once he is off that suspension. And that'll do it for this very first edition of Madden NFL 11 Fantasy Focus. Hope you enjoyed a look back at some of the best performers of the 2009 season. Very soon we will now break down the upcoming 2010 season, giving you some hints, tips, some sleepers, some busts, giving you everything you need to know to help you prepare for this upcoming fantasy football season. This is JB Huskers with the EA Sports Game Changers, and keep on gaming.